Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I don't know why I ignored the warning signs. Maybe it was the cheap price, maybe the glowing reviews, or maybe I just needed to get away so badly that I was willing to overlook the little voice in my head whispering, something isn't right. The Airbnb listing was almost too good to be true. A historic home in Savannah, Georgia, shaded by ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. The photos showed warm wooden floors, a fireplace, and a sprawling wraparound porch. It looked like something out of a dream. I booked it without hesitation. The host, Margaret, was waiting for me when I arrived. She was an older woman, maybe mid-60s, with thin lips and a nervous energy that unsettled me. Her smile stayed on her face a little too long, and her eyes flickered around the house as if expecting someone to step out of the shadows. "You'll love it here," she said, her voice thin and reedy. So peaceful, no distractions. She handed me the keys but didn't linger for small talk. Instead, she practically scurried out the door, muttering something about keeping things covered. I stepped inside, inhaling the scent of lavender and old wood. The house had a strange feeling to it, like a place that had been lived in for too long by someone who never left. The walls seemed oppressed and slightly, the air just a little too thick. Then I noticed it. No mirrors. Not in the living room, not in the hallway, not even in the bathroom. The only reflective surface was the darkened glass of the windows, which seemed to swallow the light instead of reflecting it. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe Margaret just didn't like mirrors. Some people don't. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Not the scurry of a mouse or the shuffle of tree branches against the house. This was deliberate, slow, insistent. It was coming from the closet. I held my breath, every hair on my body standing on end. My fingers fumbled for my phone, and I switched on the flashlight. The moment the beam hit the closet door, the scratching stopped. I sat up, my pulse hammering. I wasn't the kind of person who's scared easily, but something about that silence, that unnatural stillness, made my stomach twist. I had to check. Sliding out of bed, I approached the closet. The wooden floor was ice cold beneath my feet. My breath felt too loud. My heart beat a drum in my ears. I reached for the knob and swung the door open. Nothing. Just a small space filled with old, musty-smelling clothes. Then my flashlight flickered over something at the back of the closet. A large rectangular object covered with an old, dusty sheet. A mirror. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, but my hands moved on their own, reaching for the fabric, gripping it, pulling it down. The mirror was old, its frame thick and ornately carved. The glass was cloudy with age. For a moment, all I saw was my own reflection, wide-eyed, breathless, standing in the dim light of my phone. Then my reflection moved, not like a trick of the light, not like my own hesitant shift. It turned its head on its own, and it smiled. I stumbled back, my phone shaking in my hands. The reflection, my reflection, stepped forward, pressing its hands against the glass as if trying to reach through. Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then the whispering started, not from the mirror, but from inside the room. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse, shifting, growing. A cold breath prickled the back of my neck. The house groaned. The floorboards creaked as though something heavy was stepping toward me. Then the bedroom door creaked open, and there she was, Margaret. She stood in the hallway, her face pale, her lips quivering. "You saw it, didn't you?" I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone dry, my throat tight with terror. "You weren't supposed to look." Her voice cracked. "That's why I covered them. They only need one glimpse to take your place." I bolted, shoving past her. I ran out of the house, barely registering the sting of the cold night air. I didn't stop until I was in my car, my shaking hands fumbling to start the engine. My breath came in sharp gasps as I glanced in the rearview mirror. Margaret was still standing in the doorway, her frail frame shuddering. But that wasn't what made my blood freeze. My reflection was still in the house. I watched, paralyzed, as the version of me in the mirror grinned and slowly raised a hand. I drove straight to a hotel and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I checked Airbnb to report the listing. It was gone. No history, no record of Margaret, no trace of the house at all. But that wasn't the worst part. As I packed my bags to leave, I caught my reflection in the hotel's bathroom mirror. My tired, shaken face staring back at me. Then, just for a split second, it smiled. Story 2. When I first moved to Los Angeles, I didn't have much money. I needed a place, cheap, temporary, and close enough to my new job so I wouldn't spend half my paycheck on gas. That's how I found the Airbnb. The pictures looked great. Modern, spacious, and just a few blocks from Sunset Boulevard. The price was suspiciously low, but the reviews were solid. The host, Nick, had a 5-star rating and a long list of satisfied guests. I booked it for 2 weeks, just enough time to find something permanent. The first night was fine, quiet even. I settled in, unpacked my things, and watched TV until I fell asleep on the couch. The second night? Different. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure why. Then I heard it, water running, the shower. The sound was unmistakable. The soft hiss of hot water, the occasional drip against porcelain. But I lived alone. I sat up, heart hammering, listening. I grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to guide me down the hall. Steam curled under the bathroom door, creeping out in long fingers. I swallowed hard. "Hello." No answer. Slowly, I reached for the knob. It was warm. I pushed the door open. The shower was off. The bathroom was dry. No steam, no water, nothing. Just a single wet footprint in the center of the tile. I backed away, so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My skin prickled. My mind raced for an explanation, but there wasn't one. I locked my bedroom door that night and didn't sleep until the sun came up. The next morning, I messaged Nick. "Hey, has anyone else mentioned weird stuff happening in the apartment?" I stared at my screen, waiting for the little typing bubble to appear. It didn't. He left me on read. I spent the day out trying to push it from my mind. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was half asleep and dreamed the whole thing. That night, I went to bed early, determined to rest. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up again. This time it wasn't the shower. It was whispering, a woman's voice. Soft, faint, like someone was talking just out of earshot. I lay frozen, straining to hear. It was coming from the vent. I sat up, pulse pounding. My bedroom vent was just above my bed. The whispers were clearer now, a murmur of words I couldn't understand, rising and falling like a conversation. My mouth went dry. I grabbed my phone and climbed onto a chair. The vent cover was screwed in loosely, hanging slightly open at the edges. I hesitated, then reached up and pulled it off. My flashlight cut through the darkness inside. Eyes, wide, staring, blinking. A woman's face stared back at me from inside the vent. Pale, grinning. I screamed. The flashlight slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. I jumped off the chair, heart slamming against my ribs. The whispering didn't stop. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag, keys, and ran out of that apartment without even putting on shoes. I slept in my car that night. The next day, I searched online trying to find something, anything about the apartment. I found an old news article. Alice Parker, 28, missing since March. Last seen at her Hollywood apartment. My stomach dropped. The address matched. I stared at the screen, fingers trembling. Alice, the woman in the vent. I reported it to Airbnb. They removed the listing within a week. But sometimes, when I stay in hotels, I still wake up at 2:17 a.m. and hear whispering in the vents. Story 3. We wanted quiet. A break from the city, from the constant notifications, from the glowing screens that seemed to devour every moment of our lives. So when we found the listing for the cabin in Vermont, off-grid, no Wi-Fi, no service, it felt perfect. It sat in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines that blocked out most of the sky. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and old leaves. It was the kind of place that seemed untouched by time, and as we stepped inside, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The inside was cozy, rough wooden walls, a stone fireplace, a bed with a thick quilt that smelled of cedar. There was no TV, no radio, just the crackling of logs in the fireplace. That first day, we hiked, cooked over the fire, talked about stupid things that didn't matter. It felt like a different world, a safe little pocket of peace. But that night changed everything. I woke up at 3 a.m. At first, I didn't know why. There was no sound, no movement, just the heavy silence of the woods pressing against the cabin. I turned over, expecting to see my boyfriend asleep beside me. But then I saw him, a man, standing at the foot of our bed. Tall, bald, wearing a tattered suit that hung off his frame like a forgotten memory. His face was mostly hidden in the darkness, but I could hear his breathing, slow, deliberate, as if he was savoring each inhale. My throat locked up. I wanted to scream, but the sound died before it reached my lips. My fingers dug into the sheets, my whole body frozen. I managed to move, just enough to nudge my boyfriend. "Wake up," I whispered. He stirred groggy, rubbing his eyes. "What?" I pointed. "There's someone." But the second my boyfriend sat up, the man was gone, vanished, like he had never been there at all. My heart slammed against my ribs. I scrambled out of bed and flicked on the lantern. The room was empty. Jesus, my boyfriend muttered. You were dreaming. I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. But what could I say? I saw him. I heard him breathing. I barely slept the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined him standing there again, watching. The next morning, I checked the cabin door. Still locked from the inside. That should have reassured me. It didn't. When we stepped outside, the forest was eerily still. No birds, no wind. Just the sound of our own footsteps on the damp ground. I don't know what made me look down, but when I did, my stomach dropped. Footprints leading up to our window, but none leading away. My boyfriend saw them too. He went quiet, the way people do when their brain refuses to make sense of something. Maybe they're old, he said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. That night, I didn't want to sleep. I sat up in bed, my phone flashlight clutched in my sweaty palm, my ears straining for any sound. At 3 a.m., I heard it, breathing. Not mine, not my boyfriend's, something else. It was right there, just beyond the edge of the light. Deep, slow breaths. I turned my phone flashlight toward the foot of the bed. He was there, closer this time, smiling. His face was wrong, stretched, grinning too wide, eyes too dark. The suit he wore was covered in something black, something that dripped onto the floorboards with a soft patter. I screamed. My boyfriend jolted awake, grabbing the lantern. He swung it toward the end of the bed, and there was nothing there. The room was empty. No footprints, no dripping, no man. We left before dawn, threw everything into the car, and didn't look back. Weeks later, I was scrolling through Reddit, mindlessly reading horror stories to remind myself that ghosts and monsters were just that, stories. Then I saw a post. Someone had stayed at the same cabin a year earlier. They described waking up at 3 a.m. and seeing a man at the foot of their bed, in a tattered suit, smiling.